Welcome to the Simpleton podcast, the podcast that JP2 listens to from heaven. I'm here with Clark Massey with Laura Heeman.
Hey, Clark.
All right.
I like how we did the laugh into the intro, like you told a funny joke because we're like funny, you know, we just laughed, but there was no joke. We were just laughing at nothing.
How you doing, Laura Heeman?
Good, Clark. How are you?
Good. All right. We are going to have a working podcast today. We're going to work through talking about some ideas from the Classical Education podcast. We're going to talk about some ideas related to elite theory, and we also received the regional synopsis of the Synod of the Catholic Church. We're going to review whether or not any of our ideas got incorporated into that, and also just the direction that whole thing's going. I think I'm calling it a working podcast because Laura and I are working through these ideas ourselves, and don't expect a whole bunch of finished project. I don't know finished products in this podcast.
You're right.
Okay, let's start out. So we had Dr. Dan Gibbons on, professor of literature at CUA, and also very important for writing curriculum for classical or liberal arts education at the St. Jerome High School in Washington or in Maryland. Is it Maryland?
St. Jerome Institute in Washington, D.C. Yeah.
Great. What I think is interesting about that's kind of going with a lot of the themes in our podcast is this idea that there's this need for a change. There's this vibe shift happening. And part of this change is going to be a looking back or a going back to foundations.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a careful line we have to walk, because are we just trying to copy the past, or are we trying to go, as Dr. Gibbons said, like go back to where maybe we made a wrong turn?
Yeah.
Right. And what I think is kind of interesting about that statement is we kind of don't know where we're going. We just know we have to go backwards in order to get ready to go forward. Yeah.
Well, and one of his points was like you have to have like kind of a successful education and to do classical program. Right.
Yeah. Like this idea that it's not a copying of the past, but it actually is a movement forward. But I feel like we're waiting for some genius here. Like we're waiting for like the whole point of the classical movement, when it's done well, not when it's done as a copying of the past, is to equip people so that when we're in this like cultural shift, that we have a creative or very positive way to go forward.
Yeah.
Am I summarizing that right? It's a weird thing to say. It's like saying, we know there's a problem. We don't know the solution. We know the solution isn't just to go to the past. Therefore, how do we equip people to help create the solution?
Yeah. I thought one of the interesting points he made was, you know, you asked why now, and he said people are realizing that just fixing the religion books isn't good enough. And I think, you know, when we were younger adults in the faith at the beginning of that, it was kind of like, look at all these terrible religion books that some of us grew up with in CCD. And I think I maybe did have the naive idea that if you had like the right teaching in those books, that would, and I'm happy that we do have a lot better.
I think that's right. I think there was this idea that the secular, so part of what's coming to an end is kind of like a secular humanism project, right?
Yeah.
Where it was like, that project had some good ideas in it. It was like, hey, let's have a space where we can have non-sectarian conflict, build a positive future, talk about our common values, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, that idea got a life of itself, and that idea is showing itself to be fairly bankrupt now, like with certain progressivist tendencies within it and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I even see this now, like in my own parish, that we have a school that is trying to get the right religion books.
Yeah.
But it's been a fairly successful school, so it doesn't really want to reinvent its whole curriculum.
Right.
You know, and I do think that Dr. Gibbons is right. And I think you and I would agree that just getting the right religion books doesn't seem to be enough.
Yeah.
You know, that somehow there's this like pervasive secularism that's in like modern education that defeats your religion class.
Yeah. Something that I wanted to ask him about this, and I I didn't. I totally forgot. But, you know, when they were thinking about starting St. Jerome's and they were getting like parent interest or whatever, and they had written the curriculum at this point, and they talked about how, you know, the first day of school would start like in darkness, you know, and then they would turn on a light and, you know, they would have this kind of like ceremony of coming out of the dark into the light. And then they would go in all their classes, and in religion, they would talk about, you know, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. And then they would look at prisms and fire, and they would kind of look at mathematical equations for wavelengths, you know, and all
this. Are we going to make fun of this, or are you saying this is great? No, I love
it. No, this is an awesome... I think it's not just like we're getting the religion part right. It was like the whole world is the Catholic worldview. You know, right. Like it's like the mathematical equation for like a wavelength, and the people who walked in darkness, and looking at a prism and looking at literature, like these things are all, you know,
right.
And I think that's a shift in how we have seen education and Catholic education.
I want to like both like say you're absolutely right that this idea of like putting everything from a Catholic perspective, not acting like there truly are secular topics, you know, is I think correct. I did find it pretty wild though that like that was pretty heavy-handed symbolism, if that's the way. Is that what they actually do? They flip on the lights and then they start studying.
Yeah, but I don't know. Think back to your like high school. You kind of do these things in high school. It is, but I think it's like unmasked, right? Like it's not like veiled. Like we're like, yes, this is symbolic, and we can also understand it concretely and whatever, you know.
Okay.
Like,
well,
yeah,
if it works, it works. I like the idea behind it.
Okay. And let's just say that I didn't do it justice. And when I heard about it, it was like really interesting and moving. Okay. You can think maybe I'm a cheesy person now, but it was awesome. And I think this is sort of gets at the idea of like there's a vibe shift. We need to see the world, you know, and this is just a piece of addressing it.
So I thought what was interesting in what Dan said was my gut is that, you know, we have this great Catholic thought. There's this more modern thought. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, and we need to figure out how to incorporate it. You know? And Dan's thought was a little bit more like, what if the model's more like you go back to where you made the wrong turn, right?
Yeah.
And then you try to build from there. And I think that's interesting. I tried to think of historical examples where society tried to have a project like that. And the only example I can come up with is Dan's own example, which is Vatican II, you know? And I think this is the great part, but unfortunately, Vatican II, it's arguable whether or not it worked because people still don't seem to understand what the point was.
Yeah.
You know, like Vatican II, in the words of like John the 23rd or what, appears to be this idea of resourcement, you know, and this is like Benedict's idea, JP2's idea. It's kind of like, Bardini. And they were actually there, you know.
Yeah.
This idea
John Henry Newman.
Henry Newman, who's pre-Vatican II. This idea that we're going to ground the church back on its foundations, which are kind of the church fathers and scripture and things like this, right? And get us away from these like problematic ways we've been doing it. And I call them problematic. That doesn't mean any of them are actually an error or a heresy or anything, but it just means like we kind of started defining ourselves as in opposition to Protestantism and as opposition to modernism and things like that. And we weren't actually like really engaging the deepest truths of our faith as like the leading foot of our faith, you know? So that is one way to view this classical education, is that we're in a sense kind of like we built a house, we started building it poorly. We need to take these bricks off, get back down to the firm foundation bricks. But some of these bricks are still good bricks. So that when we rebuild, we need to like fit them somewhere, I guess. You know? And that's kind of a biblical way of talking about it too. I'm not so sure that's going to work, but it seems like the best. I mean, I also don't want to shame it. I feel like it's like one of the best ideas out there as far as like, no one's got a good solution right now. This is as good as any, at least. It may be the best.
You said it's problematic because like not everyone understands Vatican II, but I think the ressourcement movement like was totally positive.
Yes.
Right. So
I actually think it's the best idea. It may be why the church is we may be in a worse shape today had Vatican II not happened. You know, I think that's very likely. You know, I do think the Holy Spirit was there. But people like both the liberals and the hyper-conservatives hate Vatican II because they both see it as like an updating of the church that fails.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to a refoundation of the church and a stripping away of some of the things that were getting us off track.
Yeah.
Okay. It kind of reminds me of like, shoot down this analogy, if you will. Like you meet people who are really good at math, who are like really good at like calculus and like the mechanistic part. And they have they can't really do a proof to save their life.
Yeah.
You know, they don't necessarily understand why they do what they do, but they can like ace all the math tests because they can do the mechanistic part of it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I feel like we were getting there as a church. Like we were like raising like kids who could do calculus who had no idea why they were doing calculus.
Yeah. Yeah. You could kind of plug in any moral dilemma into St. Thomas Aquinas. Boom. You know?
Right. And here's some piety that as long as you like exercise all these things, then you're going to be cool. And here's the way you're going to treat the sacraments. It's kind of a superficial treatment where it's like they're mechanistic in order to get you to your goal.
Yeah.
And that's like not the right attitude, you know? Okay. All right. We've talked a little bit too much about Vatican II. We got to get back to classical ed. All right. So classical ed is this idea of like re-emphasize the foundation blocks and then hopefully the next generation of builders will build something better than what we built or what the last 200 years built. Or something. Where is the left turn? Where is the wrong turn in the trail that in your mind?
You know, I don't know. I feel like in college it would have been like Descartes or Francis Bacon. That's like I feel like those maybe would have been When
was Descartes writing?
Oh gosh, don't embarrass me with my.
I know. All right. I'm gonna not embarrass you right now. Okay, I've read a lot of Francis Bacon. I actually think that's great stuff. I feel like maybe we misused Francis Bacon. But like, I don't feel like he's a wrong turn in and of himself. I feel like by the time Nietzsche writes God is dead, we've already made the wrong turn.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he's like, God is dead and you better come up with something better. Don't just do this cut flower project. Yeah. Where it's like, we're going to take just what we want and not actually have deep roots, you know? But I feel like right now that cut flower project is finally wilting. Yeah. You know? It took so long for it to finally come to an end. Yeah. But like, there's a sense in which it's coming to the end, but we don't know what's next. And that's what we're trying to equip our youth for. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Now let's talk about this liberal arts education and elitism. So the reason why these things are correlated is because historically, this type of classical education or liberal arts education was an education of the elites, and it was to create leaders. Dan seems to believe all that, and that's good. And I believe that too. Then the question is it for everyone? Another question is, who cares if it's for everyone? Like, are we as a Catholic community trying to create an education for everyone, or are we trying to create an education for our own kids? Yeah. You know? Yeah. But my problem is with this education for everyone idea, if classical education or liberal arts education is an education for leaders, it was never for everyone. And it also was a little bit utility based, always. It was not just like for the greatness of soul. Yeah. You know, like the way I understand history, and I could be wrong, was that if you were a noble family or a landowning family or what, you might choose your bright kid to go get a good classical education. Yeah. You know, you didn't send your girls for one, and you also might not have sent your kid who wanted to run the farm or the lands, or who had a different interest, you know, or wasn't that bright, right? Whereas like right now, as true Americans, it's either there are no elites or we're all elite. Those are the two options. We're kind of making it for everyone. Yeah. You're sending your kind of dummy kid, you're sending your really bright kid. And I don't mean to disregard, by saying dummy, I'm not trying to even be negative. I mean, like there's kids who really want to have an active intellectual life, and there's kids who want to do something more technical, you know? We're kind of giving it to everyone. Yeah. And the argument for that would be that either we now have as much leisure as the elites of old did, so we can do an elite education. Yeah. And the other argument would be the elite education's actually for a certain greatness of soul. It's not really for utility, so that no matter what role you take in your society, this liberal arts education will be bearing fruit in you. Yeah. But I don't think that's the way. I mean, maybe since Newman did the idea of the university, that's been the idea. But like, I kind of don't think that in the Middle Ages or whatever, that was the idea.
Yeah. Just back to the idea of like, does your education, which we discussed, like make you more free or does it bind you? You know, I think like, you know, maybe like you said, it's not important that we have all our kids learning Greek and Latin, but are we giving people an education that makes them less free or less human? And I think that's like, I don't want anyone to have that, you know?
Well, there's kind of a problem that arises from this. So like, I think we're all for it. Like if this education just seems better than like, in a way, all our education right now is creating too many elites, is all for the elites and leaders, right? Like we're sending everyone to college. Like they're all going to be leaders in our society, which is impossible.
Yeah. And a surprising thing that Dan said, which I like caught me off guard. And then I was like, oh, he said, oh, well, everyone knows that American ed is like broken. And I was like, oh, we do, you know, but I think he's
right. I think he's.
No, I do. And I just hadn't like maybe said it out loud, you know.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the explosion of the homeschool movement among non-religious people, you know, they know it's broken and they're looking for something better.
Yeah. Or in charter school systems too, right? Like charter schools. Yeah.
And everyone's complaining that we shouldn't have to send everyone to college while they send all their kids to college.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a little bit of hypocrisy there. But one of the articles that came out related to this is elite wars. Mm-hmm. So there's this theory, I'm quoting a National Review article that everyone can find if you want it, that was this, if you raise all your kids to be elite, you end up with all these people who only want certain roles in society.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say they're white collar roles. If you go to an Ivy League school, there are roles in law and finance or CEOs. Those are like the only roles they want, you know? And the problem here is that we're literally overproducing elites. And when
isn't a Rene Girard idea is like there's more conflict when more people see themselves as peers, right? Like it's like you're competing for the same things.
Oh, I don't know that idea, but that does dovetail with this really well. Yeah. So like the elite wars theory is that if everyone thinks they need to be like white collar middle management or in law or in finance, then you end up with a bunch of unproductive roles and you end up with conflict in those areas, right? Like every society needs a few guys in finance, but when you have a ton of people in finance, you end up with a lot of like dead weight loss is what an economist would call it, you know? Yeah. And when you end up with too many lawyers, you end up with a lot of frivolous law stuff that hurts society, you know? And anyway, I think that's a broad critique that we're not really in danger of right now because there's not enough kids getting a classical education for it to matter. But like, is it actually equipping people to take the roles we need them to take in society? Or is it more equipping just like it historically was an elite education? And is it going to add to this problem of overproducing elites?
I was telling you earlier about the integrated humanities program that was at KU. John Senior is like the famous professor associated with that. And it like kind of lasted a decade, and like they noticed that students kind of had a defect in like wonder, memory, like imagination, etc. So they did all this like kind of humanities kind of classical program. And I was telling you that it like produced a couple bishops, one of the founders of Wyoming Catholic, the Clear Creek Abbey. It would be interesting to see like who else graduated from that program? Like what did all those people go on and do?
So like, inarguably, that was an incredibly productive program. And I went to KU, by the way. So, and I went after that program was over. But like, that was an incredibly productive program. I haven't seen any classical or liberal arts program be as productive as that John Senior program at KU was. Yeah. Right. Like if you actually look at what happened there, like they would every summer, I think John Senior there were like 3 guys involved.
Yeah, it was 3 of them.
Okay. And they would like bring people to Europe to go hang out at like a Cistercian monastery. And like 25 plus monks went there. Ended up becoming monks in France, you know, and those are the guys who ended up. I was at like Conception Abbey mowing the lawn when the first guy from France from that program came back.
Oh, wow.
I think his name was Father Lawrence. Yeah. And he was starting to acclimate back to the U.S. from the French Cistercian monastery so that he could found the new abbey or found the new, not abbey, but monastery in the U.S. Yeah. And So I met him, and he was like the first guy to come over back, went from Kansas to France after like 20 years or something, coming back, you know? And he used to we would mow with these big mowers, and he decided he didn't have enough physical labor. So he would borrow a push mower and start mowing like acres with a push mower just to get his work in.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So it was like a special program. So was it just because like the personality of these three professors?
I wonder about that, you know,
or was it the idea somehow lent themselves, you know,
the curriculum and the timeliness of it must have been very important.
Yeah.
But because none of these, I don't feel like we've seen the same productivity out of any other project like that. It makes me wonder if the guys involved had a very special charism for it, or saintliness or something like that was active too there, you know?
Yeah. You know, it's like if you can give your kids an education that you think would kind of make them more attuned or open or free to choose a faith, you know, versus an education that does the opposite, which I think we see a lot of. Like, I think the choice is clear.
Yeah. And, you know, at KU, what was interesting was even when I went there, we still had something called the Western Civ program.
Yeah.
And everyone had to take 2 semesters of Western Civ. It was a general requirement for everyone in the university. And what it did was it exposed you to, you know, like you basically got a day talking about Thomas Aquinas. You got a day talking about Augustine. You got a day talking about these great thinkers, you know. And I then went from KU to the University of Rochester, which had a very different student body. Yeah. You know, like they all were like higher SAT scores than, you know, the average kid at KU, but none of them had a Western Civ program. Yeah. You know, and at KU, we would have these great debates at the local coffee houses over Thomas Aquinas, and we were very ignorant. Yeah. You know, like, I mean, we'd read 3 paragraphs and we knew 2 sentences about the dude. But there was like this fun, like stay up in the dorm and debate these ideas, like mentality about it, you know? Yeah. And when you went to University of Rochester, there wasn't.
This is almost unrelated to the topic, but when Ryan and I first drove through Lawrence for the first time, Ryan and I are both East Coasters. Lawrence is where KU is. We were like, college, like this is like a college town, you know, people are doing college things in a way we really liked, you know, like it. Yes, the coffee shop with the arguments, all that, you know.
Right. You guys went to a very urban college at CUA.
Yeah, but
which is a different
we hung
vibe.
out like at University of Maryland and stuff. You know, like we kind of were familiar with the. Both of us had seen the movie PCU in the 90s, you know, that 90s movie, and we thought that was like college, and then it was not. But KU seemed like it was like people.
Yeah, PCU could have been could have been KU, right? Yeah. But it was cool that like everyone. What was interesting about Western Civ program was it was kind of an undesirable gig. Like the professors who taught in the Western Civ program were kind of like the history professor who the history department was tired of, or the sociology professor who the sociology department was tired of. Yeah. Like, but even just getting that little dab of mayonnaise on the sandwich, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't like anything anybody would call a good classical education. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. But even getting that little bit of mayonnaise on our sandwich really made a difference.
Mayonnaise is very important on a sandwich. So,
it is. It's a failed sandwich without mayonnaise. And University of Rochester did not have any mayonnaise. Yeah. It's like I'd be talking to these kids who were like, their major was literally like brain and cognitive science, which wasn't even a major at KU. Yeah. I'd be like, do you know what century? Can you say within 300 years when Thomas Aquinas lived? And they'd be like, we don't know who Thomas Aquinas is. And they go, there was a high school in my town called that. Like that was the level they were operating at. Yeah. Yeah. You know, this is 20 years ago, by the way. All right. All right. Moving on. All right. So you brought that up, you know, the KU program, which was very successful, and then killed because people were like, hey, we're supposed to be a secular university and all we're doing is producing Catholics. Yeah. So there's this kind of idea. I'm going to bring us back to this idea of elites, right? Elites are important, even though we Americans are kind of allergic to the idea. And it's become a ministry model. The first person I heard articulate it is the Jesuits. They would say, we go into a society and we try to, in a sense, evangelize the elites. Because if you get them to convert, you get massive conversion. Yeah. Now, that idea is still said by Opus Dei, is still said by focus, you know? And I'm not sure the idea is wrong. I've always hated the idea.
Yeah.
And when you push back on it, that that's not what Jesus did, you'll get some really tortured biblical explanations of why Jesus actually was recruiting the 12 elite apostles, which I don't think is borne out in the text.
Does not seem to be the case, but yeah.
Yeah. In a way, Jesus had a terrible business plan, but it worked.
Yeah.
He would have never gotten funding for this business plan he had.
Yeah.
And in another way, I also asked, like, Joseph Pierce is an interesting author, and he wrote a book that was very meaningful to me called The Literary Converts, about kind of the like next generation of the Oxford movement. So if the Oxford movement's like 1850-ish, this would have been like C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, you know, just get Chesterton, like people who were after that movement who were like kind of building on top of it, you know? And I asked him
C.S. Lewis was not 1850. It was later. Right.
That's my point.
Yeah.
My point is his book
I'm
was
just
kind
clarifying,
of about...
Like that those guys that we all know were building on the Oxford movement. Yeah.
Yeah. Properly, the Oxford movement is from mid-19th century, I think. So, but I asked him in a Q&A, like, was the Oxford movement actually revitalizing Catholicism widely, or was it just academics and like elites at Oxford who were converting?
Yeah.
You know? And he basically said, as I consider him an expert on it, he basically said that it does appear to have just been the elites.
Yeah.
You know, that there were good things happening in the blue collar area, but they weren't happening because of the Oxford movement. They were happening because Irish immigration into England and, you know, certain areas that had always stayed kind of true since Henry VIII and things like this, right? It was just a different dynamic. It wasn't like the Oxford movement was helping these people, you know?
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting. And it certainly doesn't mean that the Oxford movement is unimportant. It just means the Oxford movement is not the cure-all. You know, I mean, like an elite education thing is not like the thing that's going to convert all society.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because I've always thought about like, it's like you get elite morals, you know, maybe that start in academia or start, I don't know where, and they kind of trickle down, but without any of the safety nets of the elites, you know. So it's like if you have a broken marriage and you're poor, it's a lot worse, you know.
Right.
But I think an interesting thing is, though, it's like you have elites kind of trying to dismantle marriage, right? But still getting married, and it's not a good faith sort of argument dismantling marriage.
Right. Like if you look at America right now, like the most successful marriages are in upper middle class. You know,
as in marriages staying together is what you mean by that.
Right. And like historically, the poor were successfully married, but right now in our history, the poor are not successfully married, but the wealthy still are. Yeah. You know,
even though the wealthy will say, you know, marriage is an antiquated institution, blah, blah, blah.
Well, for themselves, they still believe in it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of a hypocrisy there. Right. All right. What I find interesting is like Mother Teresa. So Mother Teresa definitely was an evangelist to an elite group only because she was an evangelist first to the poor.
Yeah.
You know, and I found that to be true with Simple House in that like the only reason why people in my family have turned to me as like having some religious insight is because I serve the poor. Yeah.
But you don't serve the poor to have religious insight for your wealthy family or whatever.
I know you don't. It can't be the end, but it does have this interesting side effect, right? And I'll meet young people come to Simple House and they have the same kind of tension I did at their age, which is that, you know, I've had this religious experience. I've seen these religious truths. How do I get my parents to see this? How do I get my brothers and sisters to see this, right? And it's like, well, you don't by arguing with them. You don't by like going, like, honestly, like if you spend a year or two serving the poor, they'll start asking, like they honestly will come and ask. Yeah. You know? Yeah. It's somehow like by not focusing on them with these, you actually can have some say. Yeah. You know, it's an interesting like paradox there. Yeah. Also, we've had a lot of volunteers here that maybe their parents weren't super happy they were here, but they get invested in a particular family, you know,
that they're serving while here and they want to send Christmas presents or something. And
right. Like the parents become ministers through the kid, even if they weren't happy about the kid becoming a missionary. So you're kind of helping
them live the Christian life without, having the right ideas, and I think that's great. Yeah.
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 I think all of this is, kind of goes into a missionary mode discussion, right? So a lot of what you see in missionary work is a discipleship type model, right? Where you find someone and you teach them the faith, right? And this doesn't work with the poor, right? Yeah. In fact, it kind of often doesn't work. Evangelism's always hard, so I don't want to knock it that way. But we at Simple House have been more friendship evangelization model. Yeah. Trying to avoid using the word accompaniment so I don't trigger anyone.
Yeah.
Do you want to break that down for a second?
Yeah, I do. I have to say the first I heard about accompaniment, I really like the idea, but I think at least people perceive that it's sort of used as a way to not have to deal with the hard truths of the faith. It's like meeting people where they're at without doing a lot of correction, but sort of walking with them and patting their back and saying we love you without actually doing the other part of the work of being a missionary. And so I think people are sensitive to that. I think people are sensitive to that also in the light of maybe some of the Latin Mass stuff that has happened with the Pope. It's okay, so these people that are living immoral lives are welcome to be accompanied in the church, but we are sort of feel like you're trying to cast us out. So I think that's another element of but I think the real thing is is it being used as a sort of way to not have to do the hard work of being a missionary?
So are we too soft pedaling the truth? And they're right to say yes, in the past we have. Yeah. They're very right in that. And I had a situation where I was explaining that I think we need to have a church where the prostitute can come in and somehow figure out how to worship. In a sense, can come in and not be too ashamed to come in. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And the person I was talking to said something to the effect of, but I hope we tell that prostitute that prostitution's wrong. And I see where they're coming from, right? Yeah. But
it's the prostitute knows that prostitution.
Yeah. Anyone who's worked with prostitutes knows that their problem is the deep shame. Yeah. And they deeply know it is wrong. And that's why they're not coming in the church. Yeah. But I understand why someone who hasn't worked with that and has seen us soft pedal the truth too many times would have that other opinion, Yeah. So the point is that it triggers, right?
Yeah, but I think I really like the idea. Apparently, Pope Francis, I think at one of the World Youth Days, said, this is Father Ivany is the chaplain of a Simple House here, and we love him. And he gave this talk about accompaniment, and he said that the Pope said, most people have friends, but they don't feel like they have mentors. And I do think we're very fragmented in our society, kind of cross age and whatever. So they don't feel like they have mentors, and they need someone that lives differently, who can interpret what is going on, differently from the secular world, and someone who's kind of trained in the wisdom of the church. And I think this is Father Ivany said something we need a person of reference who's close by, credible, and consistent. And I love this. Yes, totally. And it's not, it's not exactly a peer relationship, even though we're accompany everyone, even our peers to some extent, right? But it's not a peer relationship. It's people who are both on the way, and someone might have a little bit more wisdom to offer someone that's newer or something.
Right. Yeah. But there is, And it's also interesting because when you look for this accompaniment model, or when I meet young people, they look at the older people, and maybe somebody knows more about the catechism or knows more about Thomas Aquinas or has all the answers or something like this, right? Mm-hmm. And another person has some kids and appears to be full of joy. Yeah. Yeah. And oftentimes I'll see the young people want to kind of associate with the person full of joy, looking for the secret there. Yeah. And I think that's right. And I think that that's the goal of Simple House, is to live life well and be available to help people, with that, as Benedict said, the new evangelization is teaching people the art of living. Yeah. It's not like just teaching a certain like set of truths, although those are very important.
Yeah.
If those truths if you're just being right all the time, that's not enough,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Okay. So part of this whole this elite thing has something to do with missiology, the study of mission work, because it's like, you're going to go the Jesuit model, you're going to go the Mother Teresa model. Symbolize is more in the Mother Teresa vein, but I don't discount that this other method's also useful.
Yeah. And I mean, Jose Maria Escriva, like, I mean, there's like saints that, right?
Sure. Epitomize it, you know? But the other thing, though, is we're kind of in this weird situation, I think. Part of like what's coming to an end right now is Americans are starting to realize that like our politicians aren't just statesmen.
Yeah.
And there doesn't appear to just be some pure democracy of the people happening here.
Right.
You know, there appears to be some type of corruption, and the word for that is elites.
Yeah.
You know, or oligarchy, or whatever you want to call it, you know?
Yeah.
And we need to discuss the ideas of Dave Green, who is a Catholic who goes under the name The Distributist.
Yeah.
He's on YouTube and Substack, and his ideas are pretty amazing, I think.
Yeah.
I'm going to see if we can get him on, but that's going to be kind of a moonshot on that. But we need a theory of elites, because like this old model, this idea of statesmen, this way of thinking doesn't actually describe reality.
Yeah.
It's like people jump to this idea that there's 12 guys sitting in the room.
Yeah.
Jesus is not at the head of the table.
Yeah.
And they're calling the shots. They're all white guys, by the way. And go ahead.
Just like spelling that out a little bit more, like the idea of the elites is like, maybe like, you know, it's like we have politicians saying one thing and it's like, maybe they're totally lying and they don't care about their constituents at all. There seems to be a sort of organized agenda pushing things more than actual like democracy, right? You know?
Right. So once you think that it's not actual democracy and they don't actually mean everything they say, then you're kind of in this realm of like, well, are there like a couple people sitting at a table calling the shots?
Is
right?
like Bill Gates running everything?
Right.
Or,
and if you go back further, it was always the Pope or the Rothschilds or whoever, you know, and does the Vatican still call the secret library the secret library? I wanted to look into that, because that's a terrible name, because it feeds every conspiracy theorist.
I don't know anything about that. I like.
You've heard of it though, right?
No, I don't know about that.
Oh my gosh, the Vatican has this like secret library.
I didn't read Dan Brown. I didn't ever read what's it called?
It's way before that. It really exists. It might have a new name now, but like Yeah, it's like the stacks. It's like the stacks that don't have public access at the Vatican, and like every conspiracy theorist is convinced that that's where the conspiracy theorists keep their plan.
Yeah. When you have a secret.
All right,
library.
I'm gonna have to do some research on that, and we'll have to podcast on the secret stacks at the Vatican. What are they? I think I've heard of people getting access to them, like academics saying, "Hey, I'm researching this," and asking permission.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Back to the idea. Okay, so is that the right idea, the secret council idea, or they probably get memos from Satan as to what to do? Or is it a way more complicated theory, things we might call special interest groups, things like we might call industrial complexes, things we might call who knows what, you know? And I think we need to kind of sort that a little bit, because it has a lot to do with understanding our world today. Yeah. And even understanding, like, if you were to want to be an evangelist or kind of like, anyway, to steer our Catholic community through the world, you almost have to have an idea how this really works, you know? Yeah. And what's the point of us like coming up with political theories if everyone's having disingenuous conversations?
Yeah.
You know? Mm-hmm. All right. I want to say that is something that Laura and I are talking about, and we need to have future podcasts on. And I think Dave Green would be a great guy to be talking to about that, or at least interpreting his work on that. I suggest at Simple House, we read the Heart. What's it called? It's like,
it's called The Heart Reset, but it's HE art reset.
Right.
And it was a really interesting article.
Right. He's calling it the Great Vibe Shift, which is kind of what we're describing with this, like why the classical movement is even happening is because there is this vibe shift that we're trying to figure out. All right. In other news, the Catholic Church is having a synod. The Synod on Synodality.
My friend said when I asked, I said, do you think accompaniment is loaded? And she said, yeah, it's a joke word like synodality. I said, oh, okay.
Oh, no.
But I think positive things have come from the Synod, at least locally at a Simple House, they did.
Yes. Let's mention joke words for real quick.
Okay.
I think what they're saying is the word's been ruined through
yes,
abuse.
Exactly.
And that's fine. And they're right. You know, the problem
I think she thinks
that
that's kind of tragic, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. It's still a good word in its real meaning.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's what we're trying to get at with that. All right.
Yeah.
Why was this a good thing for Simple House? So, by the way, I read that what just came out was the regional synopses. Mm-hmm. So what they did was they took different groups of states, took every diocese synod document, and then regionally made a master document that was the summary. So so this is a big summary process, which is, you know, think what you will of that as a method. But so all the parishes, everybody goes to the diocese, it's summarized into a document. That document is summarized into a region, and they push a document. And there's about 16 regions in the U.S. And the very last region is the Simple House region, which is the groups of lay groups, religious orders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where our document got summarized into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And most of our points were not incorporated. None of our best points. So the best points in our document were we need to have a RCIA process that's not just for the intellectual. Yeah. We need to have an RCIA process for poor sinners. Yeah. You know, and we also need charitable work to look like it comes more from the church and from the parish, not through, you know, there's too much of a division between the Catholics' charitable work and the church itself. Yeah. And we also want a personalist charitable work, not an institutional. Those were kind of our main points that came out of our synod process. They didn't make the master document.
It's too bad.
It's too bad. Does that mean it was a failure? Laura?
Well, so I think the Simple House volunteers in DC really enjoyed doing their synod meetings with, like, they arranged different synod. It was like, they had one with like a family that was like kind of the extended family. They had one with like a group of women. They had like a few different meetings where they talked to people and asked them questions. And I think everyone like really liked it. And it was interesting. And it was like affirming to the people we help. And it was wonderful. But they were really high after the meeting. It was like mostly grandmas and like one young woman in their 20s. Like, they said this meeting was awesome. And one of the ideas about the synodality is like, it's both a method and the thing you're trying to achieve, you know, and they achieve synod in this. Right. It was like really, the women were like really happy to be able to talk about what the church has done for them and their lives. They were happy to talk about what Simple House has done for them. They were like, I think, kind of felt respected to be asked, like, what could the church improve, you know? And it was like, they loved it. They were cheering each other on. They were crying with each other. It was like this really beautiful, awesome thing that happened.
I want to say that, like, these are evangelical moments. Like, whenever you can like start a conversation and people are willingly participating and want to actually get to some truth about church, about God, about love, you know, you're in a great evangelical moment. And the Synod both created evangelical moments for us. And it allows you to build on it. You know, once you've had that moment, there are future conversations where people are more open.
And like, these ladies were like, we got to do a Bible study togetger after this. Like, it was, you know, it was awesome. Right.
It kind of helped people like take some ownership of the church and building the church. Kind of like this statement by JFK, which he's got to be copying this from somebody, but I can't think of who it is right now. When he goes like, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Like, that statement is a fun statement, because it's like, ask not what your friends can do for you, ask what you can do for your friends. Ask not what, and it's like, ask not what your church can do for you, ask what you can do for your church. Like, this reorientation is important. You know, like, let's shape our church, right?
And I guess the idea there, like, also, it's like, not that church isn't some big bad boogeyman, you know, or something, or it's not some like, well, look what Father did and that's why blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's like all of us, you know, have ownership and responsibility in the church.
Now, for our people who did not, probably won't read these regional synods, can we say a few things about them? So everybody kind of knows what's going on. So I read the synodal synopsis of like all the lay groups, you know, that we're part of. And then I randomly clicked on two other regions. One region I clicked on was Detroit, Cleveland, and like that whole area, probably Ohio, Michigan, and even more. And the other region I clicked on very randomly was actually my own region, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, and maybe Nebraska. The first thing that struck me was they were very different, meaning like they were differently written, different fonts, different. Like it was like there was not one person creating the synopsis, right? Like they were organized differently. And then they also, what was interesting was I felt like the one for the lay groups was much more kind of like older religious orders. It felt like it was written by like, it had the kind of normal kind of talking points that you heard 20 years ago about like, you know, almost like a progressivist agenda was in it, you know?
Like nuns on the bus talking points.
I don't know what that means, but I want to say yes.
Yeah. Like women, leadership in the church, women in the priesthood.
And then when you actually clicked on the diocesan synopses for these regions, you got a much more conservative, you know, kind of view that was like, you know, we need accountability of the hierarchy because of the church sex abuse crisis. We need to welcome more people into the church. We need this, right? Oh, like clericalism. Like, for example, I think that when people talk to me from the progressive end about clericalism, I'm like, that is the most tired thing I've ever heard. Like, if anything, we disrespect priests now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Now, will clericalism always be a little bit of a boogeyman? Like, will you always have to worry that when you're in the halls of the diocese that there's a little bit of clericalism? Sure.
Yeah.
You know, in the Latin Mass community, I've seen some dangerous clericalism, but I don't think that's what they're referring to. They're just claiming clericalism is just everywhere. Yeah. You know, I just don't think that's true anymore. The way it was, say, in 1950. It's like, I think they just haven't retired their old critique. You know, it's like every time we get a chance, we're going to complain about clericalism, even though we're in such a different world than when that critique was born.
Yeah, I think, well, I don't know. That's interesting. I think that it's like clericalism is something that the good seminaries are actively guarding against.
But I think they've been actively guarding against it for decades. Like, I think.
Okay, but I think it's still relevant.
I think it's only relevant in this like very traditionalist movement. I think that the everyday like Catholic parish is not having the problem. You know, if anything, they like resent it if a pastor comes in and makes a change without having the whole parish council on their side.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what being a pastor is.
Yeah.
That's not clericalism.
Yeah.
You know, clericalism would be like putting a pastor so much on a pedestal that you can't feel like you can critique them, that you are trusting them in weird ways.
Yeah, well, and clericalism is thinking like this is like a good career to be like kind of respected and whatever, right?
Yeah,
like
it kind of gives so much respect to the priest that it actually becomes a moral tripping point.
Yeah, and you get the wrong kind of people seeking out the priesthood. But,
exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I just don't see that in the normal parish anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I see, if anything, the priests are not seen as having much power at all. But all right. Anyway, so one of the things that's kind of like a problem in like American society and has been for decades, I think, is this kind of someone called it compulsive inclusivity. You know, what does inclusivity mean? What's it mean for our church? What's it even mean in our daily life? You know, like inclusivity is not always good. It's not a biblical thing. You know, I think sharing and fairness are in the same camp. Being fair is usually a good thing. Sharing is usually a good thing. Yeah. It's not some like...
Separating the wheat from the chaff is biblical.
Right. Well, I was like once out with a brother-in-law and we needed to have a serious conversation. We were going to go like play disc golf and have a conversation or go for a walk. I can't remember what we were doing. And we're getting ready to leave the house at a family gathering. And then like one of the sisters-in-law said, "Why aren't all the brother-in-laws invited?"
Yeah.
And it was like, you don't even know why we're doing this. Like, we're getting ready to talk about something personal here. Talk about.
Yeah.
And it was like, then we had to like go invite, then all the brother-in-laws got invited and it kind of ruined everything.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And it's like, inclusivity is not something that should just be the baseline. We do need to welcome people into church, but it doesn't mean they need to be like a Eucharistic minister.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that people that are kind of allergic to like the word accompaniment or synod are afraid that it's going to be this like democratic thing that means everyone needs to be included to the full extent, you know?
Right. So this kind of gets into LGBTQ, trans, whatever you want to call it, or just we could talk about the old school gay, you know? And this was mentioned in a lot of the Synod reports. In the report by the religious orders, it was most aggressively mentioned, but in the diocesan reports, it was also mentioned in each one that I saw in a very kind of just like, hey, we need to have a stance, or we need to have like a relevant thing to say about this, or we need to have we need something that looks caring here that's also not, the world, you know? And I think what would be interesting is to talk about this in the sense of the old, the new, and the true. So when I grew up in the 90s and the 80s, there was an anti-gay, anti-homosexual bent in society that was beyond.
That was violent sometimes.
It was violent sometimes. And I never saw it be violent, but I heard it joked about as violent. Like, violence was joked about and
Laramie, like the famous thing was the kid that got killed.
I know, but I kind of don't want to judge the state of society by the most outrageous thing that happened.
I think I can think of like at least a couple examples in my life when someone was sort of assaulted.
Really?
At least that was the thing that was said about it. But
I would say that in my personal experience, I did not witness any assaults or anything like that, but I heard it talked about in a way that was like dismissing humanity. Yeah. That would have okayed violence or, and that was wrong. Yeah. Just straight up wrong. And that was not Christian. Yeah. And that was deeply in our society, I felt like when I grew up.
Yeah. And that was like, that like needed major course correction.
Right. Okay. Well, let's call that the old, right? Yeah. So then the course correction comes, and not only is it like, honor the personhood of these people, it's like
lift them up.
Bruce Jenner or Caitlyn Jenner's now the woman of the year, and don't you think she's beautiful? Clap, please. Yes. If you're not
stunning,
clapping,
courageous, brave. Yes.
Right. And that's kind of the new, where it's like, not only do you accept, but you actually have to like put it out front and center. Yeah. You know what I mean? And go beyond yourself to show how much you accept. Yeah. And that's where I felt like in the synodal documents, like the diocesan ones weren't really calling for that, but like I felt like there was a sense in which you're reading in between the lines, and this is why the word inclusivity has like been gutted. Yeah.
It makes people nervous.
Yeah, because it's stupid to do this. Yeah. Yeah. And what is the true? The true is that you need to let a man dressed as a woman into your parish. Yeah. You know what I mean? And they need to know that God loves them and that Christ loves them. Yeah. And
100%. Yeah.
And that you need to treat it like maybe they have a limitation, maybe they have mental illness, maybe they have whatever, but God is for them too, and Christ is for them too. Yeah. And your parish can't be elite in a way that it does not allow that. Yeah. And it can't be just one weirdo. It's got to be.
You can't have your special one weirdo, right? You have to have.
You can't have your one black friend.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I'm stealing Laura's line on that. That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I no way equating race with this. I just mean the way,
like the way people talk, like
I'm not racist. I have one black friend.
No, I have a black friend, and it's like, okay, yeah.
Like I was saying that we need to have a church oriented towards the poor, and then the person I'm talking to says, "Oh, we have a poor person at our parish. Like we've done it."
There's
and it's
a lot more poor people than that. Yeah.
No, you have not done it yet.
Yeah. I think an interesting thing is it's like if you can kind of get out of the culture war mindset and see the person that needs evangelize, like see it as like this is an opportunity to evangelize, or this is like an area in which we have not like spoken to meaningfully yet, and the time is like come to do that, and not so much in the against, and reaction. But this is like an area of culture that needs spoken to right now. And like Christ's message is always relevant,
Right. And I feel like the old way, I'm just kind of making the same point again, was like when we would say are gays welcome in the church, and the question would be like, oh yes, they are. We have this group called Courage, right?
Yeah, secret group that no one knows about.
Yeah, and you can't tell if there's 10 members of Courage or 10,000 members of Courage. You can't even tell, like, is this a merely symbolic act, like the one friend, or is this like a real thing, you know?
Yeah, and is Courage really calling people on to live like a fully Christian life, or are they doing the opposite, or whatever is kind of a big unknown, you know, from setting to setting? Yeah.
Sure.
I respect Courage, by the way.
Yeah, like, we actually have a good friend who maybe we should have on. He's like one of the original YouTubers.
We should have him on. Garrett.
All right. But anyway, he's a friend of Simple House, and he's homosexually oriented and been on YouTube, you know, fighting this battle for Catholic homosexual oriented people for a long time.
Yeah.
Yes. He's a member of Courage. But anyway, so the true is inclusivity, yes, but no, we don't need to take people like who are struggling like that and make them teach the youth in the catechesis class. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So these people need to be part of the church. They are part of the church. Even if you exclude them, God has them as part of the church.
Yeah, the church is for them. Yeah.
And like the more you read the gospel, the more clear that is. He's like, you know, the tax collectors and prostitutes will be entering heaven before you if you are judging like this. Yeah. You know, that's just like a very clear Jesus truth.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. And it's a scary truth. And it's also true that to the extent you judge anyone, that will be used on you at judgment. You know, it's a dangerous game to be playing. Yeah. You know? Yeah. So, it's
nice ending, Clark. Yeah.
What?
I said nice ending.
Right.
Say something hopeful. Yeah, right. I agree, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I kind of like the Synod process. It worked for us as an organization. It gave us some evangelical moments. It helped us discern our own thought. Like some of the things that we came up with through talking through the Synod, I'm now going to be using when I talk to groups. Right. So it was a good clarification, a thought moment for us. Yeah. And I think all the fears that we have that like something negative comes out of these synods, because not all Catholics have all the right opinions. Yeah. And not all Catholics even, you know, there are a few heresies running around in the church at any given moment throughout all history is true, you know? Yeah. I think those fears are just misplaced and totally exaggerated. You know, I think the Holy Spirit can easily work through this. Yeah. The whole process of the Synod is a process that takes the most crazy ideas and kind of starts pushing them to the side through the summary process, you know? Yeah. So I don't think we have anything to fear in this. And
our very local experience confirmed that the Holy Spirit seems to have been active. Yeah.
And having said that, I hope we don't do it every year.
Right.
I'm not trying to endorse it at that level. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have anything to wrap us up? So we want to talk more in the future about maybe this heart reset.
Yeah. Hopefully have him on. That would be awesome.
That'd be great. All right.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, Laura, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Clark. We'll talk soon.
All right. Peace be with you.
All right. Bye-bye.